Your daughter doesn't belong here, and I will enforce that. That was the last thing Marla Kendricks, president of our HOA board, said before she fired a warning shot above my 13-year-old daughter's head. 1 second, Neve was sitting quietly on the pool lounger, sketch pad balanced on her knees. The next, a crack split the air, and she froze, eyes wide, every ounce of recovery shattered in a heartbeat. I said, "Move, or I'll make sure you never come back here again." Marla's voice was sharp, breathless, like she'd already decided this was justified. Her hand trembled slightly on the pistol lifted skyward, but her gaze was fixed on my daughter. I stepped between them so fast I barely registered the scrape of the concrete under my boots. "That's my kid you're threatening, and that shot just violated 3 separate state statutes." Her face twitched just for a moment. Then she squared her shoulders, trying to recover whatever authority she thought the gun gave her. The entire pool had gone silent. Only the chlorine filter hummed behind us. Someone gasped. Another person muttered, "Did she just..." Subscribe now if you've ever wondered how far a neighborhood board will go when they think no one's watching. Because what happened next didn't just end in handcuffs, it tore apart the illusion every homeowner here believed. My name's Thane Marrow. I'm a federal trauma psychologist. I work with witnesses who've lived through violence, and I don't just recognize PTSD. I treat it. My daughter was sketching poolside because her therapist and I agreed it was a necessary step. One of the final ones. That lounger she'd claimed at the corner? It's where Neve first smiled again after her school shooting last year. It's where she stopped needing me to sit 3 feet away. It's where she started reclaiming the right to exist without fear. And Marla just pulled a gun on her. The HOA bylaws don't say a word about age-restricted pool access during daylight hours. But that never stopped Marla Kendricks. She doesn't enforce policy, she enforces preference. She'd sent 3 warnings in the past month, one accusing Neve of loitering, one claiming she wasn't visibly wearing a wristband. She was. And another that suggested psychologically unstable minors should require additional adult supervision. That last one wasn't even veiled, and it came with a fine. My husband Ronan had warned me. "She's escalating," he'd said, watching our feed from the trail cam we'd set across the cul-de-sac. "She doesn't care about bylaws. She cares about control." Ronan knows escalation. He's a special agent in the FBI's critical response group. He doesn't flinch easily, but when I called him seconds after the shot, my voice cracked. He was at the community gate in under 2 minutes. Marla hadn't holstered the pistol. She was still posturing by the pool ladder when Ronan arrived, badge clipped and camera already rolling. "I'd advise you to place the weapon on the ground," he said evenly. "You just fired a shot within 30 feet of a child. That's a Class 6 felony in this state under ARS 13-1209. You're not law enforcement, you're not licensed security, and you're not exempt." Marla blinked at his badge, then at him. "You don't have authority here, this is private property." Ronan stepped forward. "You discharged a firearm near a minor with known trauma history. I have every jurisdiction I need." Behind us, Neve's sketchpad had fallen into the pool. The water rippled across the graphite line she'd drawn of the same lounger. A peaceful scene. Quiet. Safe. The exact opposite of this moment. I wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't move. Not yet. I had to make sure Marla didn't touch that gun again. I had to be the wall my daughter had lost once already. The neighbors were still frozen. Phones had started recording. Victor Eames, HOA secretary, was halfway down the path, mouth parted like he wanted to speak but didn't. Not yet. Marla finally lowered the pistol. Slowly. But her jaw stayed tight. "She shouldn't have been here," she whispered. "She had every right," I said. "And you just gave up yours." The cuffs clicked behind her wrists, exactly 90 seconds later. Ronan didn't need backup. The law was already on his side. But this wasn't over. Marla had buried more than just her temper in this neighborhood, and I was going to dig every inch of it up. The police cruiser rolled away with Marla in the back seat, her hands cuffed and her mouth still moving in silent outrage. But the silence she left behind was louder than anything she'd screamed at Neve. No one said a word. Not at first. The pool deck was littered with half-empty water bottles, towels that no one dared pick up, and flip-flops abandoned like the people wearing them had evaporated. Most of the residents who'd seen it happen slipped away behind mirrored sunglasses and forced nods, pretending they hadn't seen a woman fire a gun near a child, pretending it had nothing to do with them, but it had everything to do with them, because Marla Kendricks didn't snap out of nowhere. She built her control in layers, starting with language, then leverage, then isolation. She didn't just enforce HOA policies. She invented her own and enforced them harder. The first violation she issued to us wasn't about Neve. It was about the planter box near our porch. Non-conforming design element was the phrase she used. Never mind that it matched 3 others on the street. Ours was too colorful. 2 weeks later, she cited us for a safety hazard because Neve's swing-a-therapy tool, soft-rigged and removable, had been visible for more than 48 hours. We appealed. She denied it without response. Then came the pool. We'd followed the rules. Wristbands, forms, approved guest list, and still, Marla found a problem, always with Neve, never with anyone else's kids. "You're not the only ones with trauma," she'd snapped once at a meeting when I brought up Neve's treatment plan. "We all have to make sacrifices. Yours shouldn't override the rules." But no one could ever show me where the rules said a teenager, accompanied by a parent and behaving quietly, couldn't sit by the pool. I wasn't the only one noticing it. My neighbor Camilla had pulled me aside a few days before the shooting and said, "She's ramping up, Thane. I don't think she likes Neve. I think it's personal." Personal was an understatement. Marla Kendricks had been handed power by people who were too tired to challenge her. Most of the board were either intimidated by her, indebted to her, or just grateful she handled everything. She sent a mass email every week, signed with "In service to Silver Creek," as if she were some benevolent queen instead of a bully with a clipboard and a god complex. But there were cracks forming. Victor Eames was one of them. He hadn't spoken much that day, but I saw it. The moment the gun went off, the way he stumbled backward, not just from fear, but recognition. His eyes locked on mine across the deck before he disappeared behind the fence. When I'd first moved here, he was the one who'd shown me the trail maps and told me which mailboxes stuck. Now, he looked like a man carrying weight he didn't remember picking up. Back at home, Neve sat curled on the end of the couch, a blanket around her even though the house was warm. She hadn't said much since we left the pool. Her hands trembled when she reached for her water bottle. "I didn't move," she said quietly. "She told me to leave. I didn't even say anything back, just stayed." "You didn't do anything wrong," I told her, kneeling down. "You stayed exactly where you had the right to be." She nodded, but I could see the crack behind her eyes. The kind of fracture that comes when someone's healing is ripped open without warning. She'd fought so hard to feel normal again, and in less than a second, it had all flooded back. I stood slowly, fists clenched, mind already cycling through what came next. There would be a police report, an HOA emergency session, and 1,000 whispered conversations behind our backs. But this wasn't going to be another incident swept under the HOA's beige rug. Ronan entered quietly from the side door, his face unreadable. He sat across from Neve and offered her a glass of juice, not saying anything until she took it. "She'll be booked before midnight," he said softly. "They're running it through the county DA. She'll be back," I muttered. "Not if we do this right," Ronan replied. I nodded. "Then we do it right." The camera footage, the past citations, the sealed complaints I'd heard rumors about but never seen. All of it. She wanted control. But now she was going to answer to the law. Victor Eames stood at the edge of the sidewalk, his HOA badge still clipped crookedly to his polo shirt. He hadn't been at the pool when Marla fired the shot, but he was the first board member to show up at the aftermath. Not to help. Not to speak. Just to watch. I'd seen him do it before. Watch while Marla shouted at a teen boy for dropping his towel too close to the lifeguard stand. Watch while she forced a single mother to take down her wind chimes because they violated community sound standards. He had the look of a man who cataloged everything but never intervened. Today, his mouth opened. It looked worse than it was. Ronan stared him down. "She fired a gun, Victor." Victor flinched. I know. I just meant she didn't aim at anyone. "She fired within 30 feet of my daughter," I said, voice sharp. "She didn't need to aim to cause permanent damage." Victor nodded, as if agreeing were the only thing he had permission to do. "There'll be an emergency board session. You'll be invited." I didn't say what I was thinking, that if Victor Eames had spoken up the first time Marla crossed a line, this wouldn't have happened. That maybe silence was just as dangerous as the bullet she let fly. Instead, I watched him walk away, hands jammed in his pockets, shoulders hunched like he was trying to fold himself smaller than his guilt. The next morning, the HOA group chat lit up with phrases like misunderstanding, escalation, and temporary suspension of privileges. Not once did anyone use the word gun. No mention of the firearm. No mention of a child. Just the usual glossing over that protected the board from consequence. But something had changed. Camilla sent me a screenshot of a neighborhood thread where a few brave souls were finally asking real questions. How did she even get away with carrying at the pool? One post read, "Why are the cameras never available when it's Marla involved?" Another said. And a third, from an anonymous account, "This wasn't her first time pulling something like this." I stared at that one for a long time. If it was true, I needed proof. Neve wasn't going to be another quiet statistic in this community's list of looked-away moments. I was done being polite, done being patient, and I wasn't going to wait for someone to hand me justice. I was going to build it myself. I went back to the pool that evening, long after the sun had dipped behind the stucco walls and the loungers sat empty like forgotten skeletons. The lounger Neve had claimed, the same one she always sat on, was still there. A little warped, one leg slightly bent from years of use, but it had survived what she hadn't. I stood next to it for a long time. This wasn't just about a gun. It was about every subtle threat that came before it. Every time a rule was bent to humiliate someone different. Every time fear was passed off as community standards. I'd lived in Silver Creek Vale for 4 years, and in those 4 years, I'd watched Marla turn kindness into currency and fear into policy. And Victor knew. He knew something. That much was clear in the way he looked at Ronan at the pool, in the way his hand shook when he gave me the board meeting notice. He didn't want to carry this anymore, but he didn't know how to put it down. Back at home, I printed out every HOA violation we'd ever received, 12 in total. 10 of them directly related to Nive. Most were vague, unenforceable, or based on phantom complaints. Still, we'd paid the fines. We'd filed the appeals. We'd played by their rules. Now it was time to play by ours. Ronan was already making calls, looping in a civil attorney he trusted, someone who'd handled similar HOA overreach cases. He wasn't just building a criminal complaint. He was building a pattern, a record, and if Victor Eames could be pushed just a little, he might be the crack that shattered Marla's whole foundation. But first, I had to find out what he was protecting, because no one stays silent that long unless they're afraid of something, or someone. The emergency board session was scheduled for Thursday evening, but by Monday morning, we'd already received a letter hand-delivered to our doorstep, not certified. No envelope. Just folded, HOA letterhead on top, with pending violation review, pool incident typed in bold. It didn't mention the firearm, didn't mention the arrest, not even the name Marla Kendricks. Instead, it accused us, me, Ronan, and Neve of escalating a routine enforcement interaction and creating emotional distress for neighboring families through uncooperative behavior. That was their story. That was what they were trying to make stick. I took the letter inside and laid it on the dining table, smoothing the crease until the paper went flat. Ronan leaned over my shoulder, reading each line. His jaw tightened. "They're preloading the narrative," he muttered, trying to establish that she was provoked. "They're laying foundation for a no-fault clause," I said. "If they claim it was a misunderstanding tied to a policy enforcement action, they'll try to shield themselves from liability." He nodded. "They'll bury the gun entirely." It wasn't new. Silver Creek Vale's HOA was a masterclass in administrative gaslighting. Language like concern, community standards, and policy enforcement were used to camouflage power plays. I'd seen it in their newsletters, their minutes, their reports, always circling the incident, never naming it. They wrote as if acknowledgement itself was a threat to the structure they'd built. But there was one problem this time. There was no policy. I pulled up the HOA bylaws on my laptop. I'd reviewed them before line by line when they first tried to fine us over Neve's swing, but this time I was looking for something different. Any clause, amendment, or addendum that remotely authorized Marla's claim about pool access age restrictions or wristband violations. I searched for key terms: minor, access, wristband, supervision, conduct. No policy limiting teen access with a guardian present. No mandatory adult accompaniment above age 12. No mention of psychological risk or behavioral clauses. In fact, Section 5.6 specifically allowed access to all residents under the age of 16 provided they were accompanied or supervised by a resident adult or guardian, which Neve had been every time. I highlighted the section, saved it, and opened a new document titled False Enforcement Record, Pool Access, because this wasn't enforcement. It was fiction. I emailed the document to Ronan and to our attorney, attaching screenshots of every violation letter we'd received over the past year. In nearly every one, the language danced around specifics phrases like ongoing behavioral concern, emotional discomfort reported by residents, and non-compliant passive presence. It was so vague it almost sounded clinical, except none of it was in the governing documents. Not even close. That afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The sidewalks curved through xeriscaped yards and artificial green belts. Everything here was symmetrical, perfect, quiet, too quiet. At the end of the eastern walking loop, I passed by the community bulletin board. Taped dead center was a flyer titled Reminder, Respect, Responsibility, and Rules at the Pool. It was signed by Victor Eames. I read it carefully. It didn't mention the shooting, but it did include a paragraph about emergency board review procedures and the board's commitment to fair and lawful process. The phrasing was careful, lawful, not legal. Procedural, not judicial. It felt like a toe in the water. Victor was nervous, but maybe, just maybe, he was starting to shift. Back at home, I pulled out the last formal violation we'd received dated 3 weeks before the gunshot. It was the one where Marla claimed Neve's presence caused visible unease to others. No names, no witnesses, no photographic evidence, just her signature. I checked the electronic metadata from the HOA's violation portal. The rule she cited, Section 7, Port 4 Conduct Code Enforcement, had no subclauses, nothing about psychological unease. It was pure invention, a threat pretending to be procedure. I documented it, labeled it, uploaded the images. I wasn't just preparing a defense anymore. I was preparing a pattern. And patterns had power, especially when the people behind them forgot someone might be watching. Marla had invented a rule, used it to justify targeting a child, and pulled a trigger with no policy to stand on. And now, the very rule she'd made up would be the start of what took her down. The phone rang just past midnight. Ronan was already awake, sitting at the kitchen counter with a legal pad covered in bullet points and arrows. I answered on speaker without checking the number. Doctor. Marrow? The voice was unfamiliar, cautious, male, older, slow-paced. Yes, I said. Who is this? I'd rather not say. But I used to do maintenance at Silver Creek Vale. Landscaping. Pool deck repairs. Before Marla pushed me out. Ronan met my eyes and clicked his pen twice, the way he always did when things were about to get serious. Why are you calling? I asked. There was a long pause, a breath. Because I saw the news, the man said, and because I should have said something a long time ago. He didn't want to meet in public. Said he had paperwork copies of a repair log, HOA maintenance reports, even a statement he'd been asked to sign and keep quiet. He described one incident in particular 2 years ago, before Neve and I moved in, where Marla allegedly confronted him over a missing keycard and accused him of trespassing near the clubhouse after hours. He said she unzipped her purse and showed her pistol, didn't aim it, didn't threaten, exactly, just showed it. Victor was there, the man said. He didn't say a word, just stood there with the clipboard while she said I was making the ladies uncomfortable. I left the job a week later, took the settlement, but I've got the original email and a copy of the agreement they made me sign. You still have it? I asked. I do, he said, because I never trusted her. We agreed to meet the next morning in a small cafe just outside the HOA boundary, one of those quiet places with booths that sink a little too low and coffee that tastes like it's been reheated 3 times. He arrived alone, baseball cap pulled low, or the kind of jacket that says I'm invisible on purpose. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, scanned PDF printouts of internal maintenance tickets. One of them was flagged with a red sticky note, Maintenance Staff Conduct Concern, CVP. Below that, typed notes, handled internally. Escalation resolved by HOA President. No further action needed. Another document showed a non-disclosure agreement between the HOA board and the man across from me, dated 26 months ago. The language was tight. All liability waived. Silence required. But what stood out wasn't the NDA. It was the digital timestamp at the bottom of the associated incident report. Victor Eames, logged by at 8:13 p.m., signed 8:17 p.m. He'd witnessed it, logged it, and stayed quiet. This, I whispered, is pattern. The man across from me nodded once. I didn't want to be part of it, but I didn't want to lose my house either. She made things hard for people. I had kids, mortgage. You get it. I did. We thanked him. He left before we did. No handshakes, no formal goodbyes. Just a nod and a fast walk to a dusty truck that pulled away slow and quiet. Ronan held the folder in his lap the whole ride home. You think Victor still has the camera footage? I asked. If he does, it's under pressure, Ronan replied. But he tapped the folder. This means the incident with Neve wasn't isolated. If we build this correctly, we're not just showing recklessness. We're showing concealment. He was right. Marla's shot wasn't a moment of madness. It was the end point of a road paved with ignored warnings, silent witnesses, and twisted authority. Every report that disappeared. Every victim who backed off. Every board member who looked the other way. And Victor had been there for all of it. The next morning, I dropped the printed report into our growing case file. Ronan scanned everything, logged metadata, attached context. At the bottom of the last page, I wrote one line in red ink before sliding it into a plastic sleeve. Prior incident with firearm. Witness, V. Eames. Board concealment confirmed. Because it wasn't just about proving Marla had crossed a line. It was about proving the board helped her draw it. It happened at the grocery store, of all places. The one by the freeway with the pastel signs and soft jazz that always made Neve roll her eyes. We were in the produce aisle, picking out apples, something normal for once. She reached for a Fuji, paused, and froze mid-motion. Her hands stayed outstretched. Her breathing shallowed. Her gaze wasn't on the apples anymore. It was on the narrow aisle between displays, where a woman with short silver-blonde hair was pushing a cart slowly past. It wasn't Marla, but it was close enough. I stepped toward her instinctively. Neve, it's okay, I said softly. You're safe. She didn't move, not for a full minute, and when she finally looked at me, her eyes were glassed over not with tears, but with that distant dissociative shield I'd seen too many times in my line of work. She was gone, not physically, but gone all the same. I helped her sit on the bench by the front window. She clutched the grocery bag like a flotation device, breathing shallow through her nose, fingers tight on the plastic handles. I didn't say anything, she whispered. I know. I didn't move. You didn't have to. You did nothing wrong. Her lips pressed together until they went white. Then she turned her face to the glass and didn't say anything else. We didn't finish shopping. I didn't need to. When we got home, she went to her room without a word. The door clicked shut, not slammed, but slow, careful, controlled. That was the worst part, her control. The way she managed every breath so it wouldn't shake. It wasn't natural for a 13-year-old. It was practiced, and that practice came from pain. I stood in the hallway for a while, staring at the door. Then I turned and walked straight into the living room, where Ronan was reviewing case timelines on his tablet. She's slipping, I said. He looked up, instantly alert. What happened? PTSD spike. In public. Visual trigger. I sat hard on the couch. She froze mid-action. Couldn't regulate. No speech for 30 seconds. Ronan didn't respond immediately. He set the tablet down, leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. That's the second time in a week, he said. First at the store. The other was after the shooting. Her therapist's notes confirm it. Last night's email said heightened vigilance, regression to pre-exposure coping. She's spiraling. He let out a breath through his nose. Then we can't wait anymore. We both knew what that meant. This wasn't about holding the HOA accountable. It was about stopping Marla Kendricks from becoming another chapter in Neve's trauma journal, and it was about making sure the system that enabled her couldn't tuck this away under platitudes and policy smog. We need the footage, I said, from the pool, the original file, with audio. If it exists, Ronan replied, Victor has it, and he's close to breaking. You saw it at the meeting. His hands shook when Marla spoke. He didn't even sit next to her. Ronan leaned back, calculating. You want to push him. No, I said. I want to free him. That night, I wrote a letter. Note for Mo. Not accusatory, just honest. I told Victor what Neve had experienced. I told him about the grocery store. I told him about the reports we'd found, the documents tied to his name, the email that had his digital signature time-stamped on it. I didn't demand anything. I asked for something, truth. I dropped the letter in his mailbox myself. No email, no paper trail, just ink on paper and a father asking another man to step out of the silence he'd been trapped in. Then I waited. I didn't know if he'd respond, but I knew if he did, it would change everything. Because with Neve slipping, with her progress crumbling, with Marla's violations no longer theoretical but physical, audible, recorded, this wasn't procedural anymore. It was urgent, and if Victor stayed quiet, I'd find another way to bring her down. But if he spoke, it wouldn't just be a crack in the board's wall. It would be the beginning of the collapse. Victor showed up just after dusk. I heard the knock, 2 soft taps, then a pause, then one more. When I opened the door, he stood there in a faded windbreaker, holding a thumb drive between 2 fingers like it might burn him. I didn't send the letter, he said, voice low. I read it twice, couldn't sleep after. He stepped in without asking. I didn't stop him. Ronan looked up from the dining table where he'd been organizing case files. He didn't say anything at first, just closed the folder in front of him and nodded toward the chair across from him. Victor sat like a man expecting judgment. I have something, he said. It's not official. It was supposed to be overwritten by now. He held up the drive. I pulled the footage before the system scrubbed it. The pool camera's raw feed. It includes ambient audio, no compression, no HOA edits. The board didn't even know I archived it. Ronan took the drive gently and inserted it into his laptop. No one spoke as the file loaded. No one breathed when the image opened full screen. The pool shimmered under evening sun. A few scattered kids splashed in the shallow end. Neve sat on the lounger sketching, headphones in. Marla walked into frame from the north gate. Fast, sharp movements, jaw tight. We listened. You've been told, Marla snapped, voice crackling through the feed. Neve looked up, took off one earbud. My dad's right over there, she said, pointing. You're a liability. You don't belong here. The air changed. Ronan paused the video. She uses the word liability, he said. I stared at the screen. That's the same phrasing from our violation letter, word for word. He hit play. Neve didn't move. Marla stepped forward, tone rising. Don't test me. You think I won't do what's necessary? That's when she reached into her bag. The sound of the gunshot came half a second later. People screamed. Neve ducked. My silhouette sprinted into the frame. Victor turned his head as the footage played out. He didn't need to see it again. When the clip ended, Ronan ejected the drive and set it aside carefully, like it carried live voltage. I wanted to speak up, Victor said, hands clenched in his lap. So many times, but I kept thinking, maybe it was just me. Maybe I was the only one who saw what she was doing. You weren't, I said quietly. I signed things, helped her bury things. His eyes flicked up to mine. But I didn't know it would come to this. Ronan's voice was calm. This footage changes everything. With your statement, it becomes irrefutable. Victor leaned forward, elbows on the table. I'm not good with courts. I'm not a fighter. You don't have to be, I told him. You just have to tell the truth. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded once, the smallest motion possible. There's more, he said. There was a private memo circulated after the landscaper incident 2 years ago. I didn't keep the email, but I printed it just in case. It wasn't logged in official records. It was her direct order to the board. Do not escalate pool incidents to external authorities unless legally required. He pulled a folded page from his pocket. Ronan unfolded it slowly. The memo was real, dated, signed only M. Kendricks. "Victor," Ronan said, "you realize this memo proves deliberate suppression. If we attach this to the pool footage, the DA won't just charge her. They'll start looking at obstruction." Victor rubbed his hands together like they were cold. "I'm not protecting her anymore." He stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "My wife used to say silence was a form of violence. I didn't believe her back then. I do now." Then he walked into the dark, shoulders straighter than I'd ever seen them. Ronan slid the thumb drive and memo into a fireproof folder. "We've got her," he said. I looked back at the paused frame of the video still glowing on the screen. Marla, frozen mid-step, arm raised, face twisted in power she thought no one could take from her. But she was wrong, and she was finally out of time. By sunrise, the strategy was no longer about defense. We weren't hoping to get the board to back down. We weren't appealing citations or filing internal grievances. We were moving outward, now beyond the HOA, beyond neighborhood diplomacy. The moment Victor handed us the footage and that printed memo, we crossed the threshold into legal territory where Marla no longer controlled the narrative. Ronan spent the morning in our home office with the blinds drawn, the door closed, and 2 phones burning through minutes. His voice stayed low, but focused, talking to an assistant U.S. attorney, then a contact at the state-level Department of Public Safety. By noon, he had arranged a chain of custody for the evidence, logged a copy into a federal secure database, and filed an official report citing Title 13-1029, discharging a firearm with criminal negligence near a minor. He handed me a printed packet of the report summary and said, "This is no longer local. The beauty of federal documentation is that it moves quietly but decisively. No shouting matches, no HOA board huddles, just a slow, grinding gear turning behind a locked vault door until suddenly everything gives at once." Meanwhile, I assembled our community impact file. Every violation Marla had issued to us over the past year was printed, time-stamped, and marked, each one tied to Neve, each one cross-referenced with an internal policy that either didn't exist or had been manipulated. I annotated them with Victor's notes, highlighted the inconsistencies, matched language across emails and formal notices. Patterns don't lie, especially when they start repeating like copied code. I also documented Neve's treatment timeline, medical records showing her post-traumatic progress, letters from her therapist verifying the use of the pool as part of exposure therapy, and 2 incident reports since the shooting, both recorded by licensed providers. No embellishment, just facts. The kind of facts that make judges go quiet and juries lean forward. Ronan added it all into the brief. "Final count?" I asked him. He didn't look up. 12 violations, 3 misuse bylaws, 2 suppressed incidents, 1 reckless discharge, and now a civil suppression claim. And Victor? Willing to testify if it doesn't go public. I nodded. That was enough. If this went where it was supposed to, he might not have to. At 4 p.m., we met with our civil attorney in a glass office just outside the HOA's jurisdiction. A former HOA reform litigator with a reputation for cutting through board-level doublespeak. Her name was Dana Selwick, and within the first 5 minutes, she did something I hadn't seen anyone do in this entire ordeal. She laughed. "You're not building a complaint," she said, flipping through the packet. "You're building a sledgehammer, and this board isn't going to survive it." "We're not looking to burn the place down," I told her. "Just fix the rot." "Same outcome," she replied dryly. "Just cleaner." She reviewed the footage, scanned the memo, and flagged several legal violations even we hadn't noticed, specifically the suppression memo and its wording, which could qualify as intentional governance negligence under state HOA code. If they don't act immediately to discipline Marla after this footage becomes public, the entire board could be named in a class action. That's not just bad optics, that's insurance liability. Board protection policies won't cover criminal negligence. Ronan leaned back in his chair. "What would you do next?" Dana tapped the memo with her pen. "I'd file a pre-litigation notice. Give them 5 business days to hold a public emergency vote or submit to third-party oversight. Simultaneously, notify their liability carrier. That'll make the board sweat faster than a subpoena." "And Marla?" I asked. "She's already facing charges," Dana said. But the goal is to cut off her power before she spins it. You don't want her martyring herself in front of the neighborhood. We left the office with a plan. Ronan would submit the federal chain of evidence by morning. Dana would file the formal demand. I'd start contacting the neighbors, those who had asked quiet questions in threads, those who told me in whispers they were tired of being afraid of their own board. It was time to mobilize them. Because what was coming next wouldn't just be legal. It would be public, law, and permanent. The day before the emergency board meeting, I walked the neighborhood alone. Not to knock on doors or hand out flyers. Not yet. I just walked. Past the houses with the identical stone facades, past the mailbox clusters and sculpted hedges, past the quiet porches where neighbors once greeted each other without looking over their shoulders. There was a heaviness in the air, something between silence and suspense. Word had spread, not in full detail, but enough. People knew something had happened at the pool. They knew the board was holding an unscheduled vote. And most importantly, they knew Marla had vanished from her usual routes. No morning patrols, no clipboards, no circulars. That alone was enough to set the current shifting. By midday, Ronan had assembled the full legal brief. 2 leather folders, one for the DA's liaison, one for the HOA's insurer. He added laminated copies of the pool footage, Victor's statement, the suppressed maintenance report, and the memo. Each section tabbed, indexed, and sealed. The letter to the board was delivered by courier at 2:15 p.m. It included a formal demand for Marla's immediate removal, citing gross misconduct, criminal endangerment, and board-level policy suppression. Dana had included case precedent from 2 similar HOA collapses, one in Arizona, one in Nevada, where insurance carriers pulled coverage mid-investigation. At 4:30 p.m. we received confirmation. The HOA's carrier had acknowledged receipt and requested a copy of the full footage. That meant they were treating it as a potential liability event. That meant the clock had started ticking. I didn't wait. I returned to the HOA portal and posted a formal comment on the community thread, a brief, factual statement outlining the timeline of the pool incident, the policy violations, and the fact that criminal charges had been filed. No emotion, no accusation, just clarity. Within an hour, 5 new usernames had commented, short messages, one-liners, but enough. Finati. She threatened my kid 2 summers ago. I have emails too. Want compare. Does this mean the footage exists? I'm coming to the meeting. That evening we hosted a small gathering in our backyard. Not a protest, not a rally, just coffee and quiet coordination. 10 neighbors showed. 3 brought their own HOA letters. One had a phone log of calls she made to complain about Marla's behavior. Calls, she said, were never logged by the board. Ronan documented everything. We didn't need them to speak publicly, not yet. We just needed confirmation that the pattern extended beyond us, and it did. The swing violation, the planter fine, the noise complaint about a child's laughter, the repeated threats over visible disorder. Marla hadn't just targeted Neve. She'd been building a private enforcement regime for years, handpicking who she controlled and who she left alone. By the time the sun set, we had a list of 11 supporting accounts, 5 with documentation, 2 willing to speak at the meeting. Victor texted me around 9. I've informed the board, told them I won't redact or defend her. I stared at the message longer than I should have. It was the kind of text that carried more weight than a letterhead. The next morning, Ronan finalized the exhibit binders, 1 for each board member, 1 for the insurer, 1 for the HOA attorney. I printed Neve's therapist letter and added it as the final page. When I asked if he was nervous, Ronan shook his head. She's already lost. The only thing left is whether the board wants to go down with her. I looked out the window, where the pool shimmered behind the locked gate. The same lounger still sat in the corner, warped leg and all. Neve hadn't returned to it since the shot, but she would. Not because she forgot what happened, because she'd know it couldn't happen again. That was the real victory we were building, not punishment, not revenge, safety. By the end of the day, Silver Creek Vale would have to choose which side of that line it stood on, and we'd be ready either way. They held the emergency board meeting in the main clubhouse hall, a space usually reserved for potlucks, yoga classes, and HOA holiday parties with plastic trees and bad cookies. That night, the chairs were arranged in sharp rows. the board seated at a long folding table draped in burgundy vinyl, as if covering it made the occasion more official. Victor sat at the far left, apart from the others. His hands were clasped tightly, shoulders hunched, but his eyes stayed forward. The chair beside him, Marla's, remained empty. I watched the crowd filter in. More than I expected, at least 50 residents. Most sat quietly, a few whispered. Some stared at us, at Ronan and me, as if trying to place the versions of us they'd known with what they were about to hear. Dana arrived 5 minutes before it started. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Just took a seat 2 rows back, briefcase in her lap. The HOA president pro tem man named Dennis Mayfield called the meeting to order. His voice shook slightly as he read the purpose of the session, to address recent events involving enforcement discrepancies and allegations of board misconduct. It was a sanitized phrase, empty of weight, until Ronan stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't dramatize, just opened his folder, removed a single USB drive, and placed it on the table in front of the board. This drive contains unedited surveillance footage from the Silver Creek Vale pool, he said, addressing the room. It captures an incident in which Marla Kendricks discharged a firearm within 30 feet of a minor. That minor is my daughter. A ripple moved through the room. She was not armed. She was not violent. She was sketching on a lounger, wearing her wristband, accompanied by her guardian, and in full compliance with HOA policy. The firearm discharge was unprovoked, reckless, and criminal. He paused, letting the words settle. We have attached a timeline of citations issued against my daughter by this board, none of which cite enforceable policy. We also have a memo, printed and dated, in which Marla Kendricks directed board members to avoid escalating pool incidents to external authorities, regardless of severity. That memo constitutes deliberate suppression. No one interrupted. Ronan turned to Victor. Mister, you were present during both this incident and a previous unreported firearm display 2 years ago involving a contracted landscaper. You have now submitted a statement confirming those events. Is that correct? Victor nodded once. Yes, it's correct. Dennis cleared his throat. Mr. Marrow, we appreciate you bringing this to our attention, but this setting may not be appropriate for. Ronan cut him off, still calm. The HOA is no longer the only authority involved. The footage and all supporting documents have been submitted to both the county DA and the HOA's insurance carrier. You are not being asked to judge Marla Kendricks' guilt. That's already underway. You are being asked to decide whether this board will remain complicit in her actions. He stepped back. I followed. I looked at the people gathered, some with arms crossed, some leaning forward, some blinking like they were seeing sunlight for the first time. A man near the back raised his hand. I got a citation last fall for my daughter leaving her flip-flops by the pool. Is there a record of that? Another voice chimed in. I was told I couldn't bring my autistic son unless I provided medical clearance. That wasn't policy either, was it? One by one, hands raised. Quiet confessions. Sudden clarity. The silence broke. Dennis looked overwhelmed. We'll need to convene briefly to review this material before taking a formal vote. You have 5 business days, Dana said, standing for the first time. That's what the pre-litigation notice stipulates, but I'd suggest acting now, before this crowd becomes a deposition list. The board recessed. Victor remained in his chair, motionless. After 10 minutes, they returned. Dennis spoke, eyes down. Effective immediately, the board votes to suspend Marla Kendricks from all HOA functions and appoint an external mediator to oversee all policy enforcement for a 90-day period pending further legal resolution. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a closing door. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like weeks, not because we'd won, because the board finally stopped pretending no one had been hurt. Marla's house went dark the next morning. No porch light. No walkway sprinklers, no clipped hedges waiting for her morning inspection lap, just blinds drawn tight and silence on the cul-de-sac where her white SUV usually glared like a badge of office. Someone said they saw her husband packing suitcases into the back of a rental car at dawn. No one asked where they were going, they just let them leave. What they couldn't leave behind, though, was the weight of what she'd done and how many had helped her do it. The board's vote may have suspended her, but it hadn't erased the pattern. Not for me, not for Neve, not for the others who had started speaking up. Over the next 2 days, Victor forwarded 3 more internal emails, all informal, all from Marla. None of them copied the board's general inbox. She'd sent them directly, line by line, establishing her control behind the scenes. One email read, "We can't have behavioral volatility at shared amenities. Quietly restrict repeat issues. We'll handle complaints if they arise." Another, "Use phrasing like disruption potential gives us room to escalate without specifics." And the last one, "Avoid direct denial. Just delay access. The less confrontation, the less exposure." Those words weren't policy. They were strategy. And they'd worked for years because no one had questioned the frame she built around them, until now. Dana submitted the compiled evidence packet to the board's liability carrier on Friday. The footage, the statements, the printed emails, a side letter advising that any further attempt by the board to minimize or deflect the pattern would be considered a bad faith action, exposing them to full legal liability under the HOA's indemnity provisions. The message was clear: comply or collapse. The insurer responded in less than 12 hours. They sent a directive ordering the board to suspend all pending enforcement actions tied to Marla Kendricks until a formal legal review could be completed. Any attempt to issue new citations related to pool access, behavioral codes, or minor restrictions would trigger an automatic audit. In other words, the weapon she'd used to punish my daughter was now locked because the people who used to look away had finally looked too long. Neve watched all of it happen from a distance. She never asked for updates, never joined the conversations, but she lingered nearby when Ronan and I talked late at night. Her bedroom door always cracked open a sliver wider. Her sketchbook came back out just faint pencil lines at first, soft curves that barely touched the page, but they were there. Saturday morning, she walked out onto the pool deck again. It wasn't a performance. No cameras. No fanfare. Just her and the lounger, and a pencil tucked behind her ear. The pool was quiet, only a few neighbors, 2 kids floating in the deep end. One woman gave her a nod. A man moved his towel aside so she could pass. She sat down and didn't flinch. From my spot under the shade structure, I watched her shoulders relax. She adjusted her earbuds. Sketched, just like before. Victor arrived 10 minutes later. He stood by the fence, watching her for a full minute before he walked over to me. "She came back," he said, voice soft. "She did," I replied, "on her terms." He nodded slowly. "It's been quiet on the board since the insurer stepped in. That won't last. Some of them will push back, try to spin it." "Let them," he said. "I'm done translating silence into support." I looked at him, really looked. The stoop in his back was gone, his voice steadier. There was a weight lifted from him, the kind that only leaves when you finally stop defending the indefensible. "She's not the only kid in this neighborhood," he said, "but she might be the one who saved it." I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because Neve was already sketching again. Because the bullet missed but the message didn't. And now every parent at that pool knew where the real danger had come from, and who had finally stopped it. The pool looked different that evening. Not physically the same turquoise water, the same faded depth markers, the same warped lounger in the corner, but something in the air had shifted. The hush that used to hang over this place like a warning was gone. People talked again. Kids laughed. A sense of ease, tentative but real, drifted across the deck. Neve walked beside me, sketchbook pressed to her chest. Her steps were slow, careful but not fearful. When she reached the lounger, she brushed her fingers across the armrest like she was touching a memory, not a threat. She sat down, opened her sketchbook, and let her pencil move. The lines came steady this time. Ronan stood at the fence, arms crossed, watching the way the sunset reflected off the water. He wasn't scanning for danger anymore, just observing, as if confirming that the world could be normal again. 2 days had passed since the board's vote, 12 since the gunshot, and the whole Marla had blasted into our lives finally felt like it was closing, not bleeding. The DA had officially filed charges: reckless endangerment, unlawful discharge of a firearm, and contributing to a hazardous environment involving a minor. Her arraignment was scheduled for next week. The HOA's insurer had frozen all her decision-making authority and initiated a third-party audit of every enforcement action from the last 3 years. Residents had already begun organizing a recall vote, but the victory didn't feel loud. It felt quiet, steady, like something had clicked back into place after drifting for too long. I sat beside Neve on the lounger. She didn't look up, just kept sketching the reflections on the pool surface. "Dad," she murmured, "do you think she's going to jail?" "It's possible," I said, "but what matters is she can't hurt anyone else now." She nodded slowly. "I didn't think I could come back here. I know. And I didn't think people would believe what happened. I watched the ripples shift under the pool lights. People believe truth, Neve. Sometimes it takes longer than it should. Sometimes it takes someone brave enough to show it." She closed the sketchbook gently. "I'm glad you didn't let it go." I swallowed hard and brushed her hair behind her ear. "I'll never let anything happen to you that I can stop." A few neighbors walked past and offered small nods of respect, not pity, not awkwardness. Actual respect. The kind that comes from finally seeing what had always been happening in front of them. Victor approached us a moment later. He looked different, lighter somehow, like telling the truth had stripped 10 years off his posture. He stopped a few steps away, hands clasped. "I submitted my formal statement this morning," he said. "To the DA, to the insurer, to the board. All of it. Good," I said. "And the pool camera?" He hesitated. "I gave them access to the entire archive, not just the incident. If there's anything we missed, they'll find it." Neve nodded at him. "Just once. A quiet thank you." Victor blinked hard and stepped back. She shouldn't have had to be brave for all of us, but she was. When he walked away, Neve let out a long exhale. "I think he needed that more than we did." "Maybe," I said. The sun slipped behind the clubhouse, leaving the water glowing a soft blue. For the first time since the shot, I felt my shoulders drop, the tension releasing slowly, like untying a knot that had been pulled too tight. Ronan joined us and sat on the edge of the lounger. "The board announced a temporary oversight committee," he said. "Residents electing members directly. No more unilateral enforcement." "That's a start," I replied. "It's a correction," he said, "a long overdue one." Neve leaned her head on my arm. The moment held there, quiet, fragile, but alive, a piece of our life returning, not stolen. I looked around the pool, at the families who no longer avoided eye contact, at the teenagers laughing near the diving board, at the empty chair where fear used to sit. Silver Creek Vale wasn't fixed, not entirely, but the foundation had cracked open and light was getting in, and with everything finally settling, all I could think to ask, because I wanted to know who out there needed their own fight to begin, was this. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from.